just in general. I know my disposition is super cheerful, super like, woo, but I do like dark things. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. And Natasha Denona released another beautiful eyeshadow palette. Today we're talking about Natasha Denona's Glam eyeshadow palette, and this is one of her 15 pan eyeshadow palettes that are a smaller size, and I was actually expecting this one to come. I never called it on camera, but I called it to myself, and that's because she has this mini glam eyeshadow palette. She has a mini glam, but there was yet to be a glam palette. For me, this isn't very surprising. It's very alluring to see this release, and I don't know if I already said this, but this is the most beautiful, most attractive to me color story among any of her palettes so far. And so I liked the bronze palette like a lot. I made one of these videos for the bronze palette too, but something about it, like maybe it was a little too warm for me. Maybe the bronzes were too orange leaning. Nonetheless, we have this beautiful one, but I'm gonna try not to buy it because it's $65 still. If you're new to my channel, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go, and let's get into what this video is about. So I have a series on my channel. Some other people have this series. I know like Christina Brooke has pretty much the same concept. I was inspired by Lauren May Beauty and Hannah Louise Poston when they would try to dupe the vibes or dupe within their own collection a new release. So it's one of those concepts. I like to be as like exact as I can. So instead of just duping the vibes, I go full all in to dupe every single shade. I do this with what I consider to be a reasonably sized eyeshadow palette collection. Previously it was like 35 to 40 palettes, but recently I actually did an eyeshadow palette declutter where I pretty much cut that in half. So now I'm in the low 20s in terms of how many palettes I have to pick from. Going forward in this video, I'm going to show you my all together arm swatches. I'm going to compare my collection swatches to the ones from Trend Mood. After showing them all together, I'm going to go through shade by shade and show you the live swatch of each of these as I was putting these swatches together, as well as where that shade is actually from. I find value in both what the final swatch looks like, but also how the swatch looks live, because like anything could have happened between bare skin and a final swatch. So I like to show that process as well. And lastly, I will go through just a quick like voiceover tutorial of how I did my look today using the shades in this video. Now, first, let's see all together those swatches. So here they are on my arm. Such a beautiful color story. One thing I do like about this palette in terms of like the color selection is that many of the metallics are light or light medium to mid-tone. Not a lot of like deep shimmers, which I don't use those a lot as like a lid shade. A lot of times if I'm using a lid shade, it's either mid-toned or light. So I'm happy to see a lot of those tones just like conceptually within this palette. Here are those swatches compared to Trend Mood swatches, where she actually used the palette of discussion today on her arm, and we can see the similarities, how well I did. One shade I actually just straight up did not have that kind of tone in my collection, and that is the very first top shade. In the original palette, it's like a very, very gray taupe. I hate the way grays look on me. I think they make me look deceased, so I won't buy it. Now let's go shade by shade through this palette. And because of the way the comparison swatches are, I am gonna go through these not in the most intuitive order. I'm going to go first row right to left, second row right to left, third row right to left. And I will put like a picture here with an arrow pointing to which shade I'm talking about as we go along. So y'all don't really need to think that hard to follow along. All of the shades in this palette are named. As far as I could see from the very first picture, they're not named like with their own unique names. They're named with what the most common use of it would be. So like crease, transition, inner corner, outer corner, so on and so forth. Starting out in makeup, I remember I would look at a palette and like not even know where to start with that. So I think that would be helpful for the marketing to the general population. I don't know how I feel about it personally, because I actually think I prefer each shade having their own specific name because it kind of attaches an identity to that color, but that's just me. I bet a lot of people talking about this palette in the upcoming weeks are going to say, wow, like that's so creative and So useful that they named the shades like that, but I like every single creative aspect of a palette, and that includes the names. All right, the rightmost shade on the first row is the Transition. It is that kind of gray taupe cream color, which I don't have one of those in my collection because I know they don't look good on me. For me, I just kind of filled this with a matte cream color from the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette, and the shade I picked is Fresh, this cream up here. The second shade is like a cool tone crease shade, and for that I go back to my default cool tone neutral palette, the Sultry palette, and the shade I picked is Twig. The third shade, which is in the middle of the first row, is what looks to be like a champagne inner shimmer kind of, and it's called Inner Corner. For that I picked from my So Jaded palette. All of the colors are in different places, but I picked this shade called Pearl, and this is a metallic champagne. I have a ton of just like inner corner highlighting shades, but I swatched them all next to each other, and the ColourPop So Jaded Pearl had the best nude undertone that matched the Trend Mood swatch. A couple of the contenders that I turned down was Pearl from the Sultry palette, as well as a champagne from the Tarte palette and the champagne from this mini nude palette. They just didn't have the right undertone. So onto the fourth shade. That is called Outer Eyelid, and this is like a silvery taupe. For that I picked one of my new Sydney Grace single eyeshadows in the shade Tiara, which is one of my favorite shadows lately. I've been loving just using this, shearing it out all over my lid as a one shadow look. But yes, here is Sydney Grace Tiara. The fifth shade is labeled Center Eyelid, and this is a light pink metallic. For that I reached into my Huda Beauty palette, and I picked this lower left pink metallic. And again, this one had a better tone to match the swatch than did the one from the Sultry palette, because this one has more like gold glitter throughout it, which the Natasha Denona doesn't look like it has. Now onto the second row, starting from the right again, there is this silver shade labeled Center Eyelid, and for that I reached into my Huda Beauty palette and picked this silver here. Again, every time I pick from the Huda Beauty palette, I'm comparing it to like this similar shade from the Sultry palette. This silver has more like nude skin tone running through like the base, whereas this one is more of like a true silver. Moving left along that second row, the next shade is like an icy white, and for that I reached into, this is the Tarte Rainforest of the Sea Volume 3 palette that I depotted, and I just picked the iciest white shade within that palette. A lot of times when I'm looking for like a icy white shimmer metallic, I will reach into my Juvia's Place the Saharan palette, because there's a really icy white within there, but it's so icy that it even looks a little bit blue, and this swatch of the shade didn't look like it had any blue at all within it, so to stay more true, I went into this Tarte shade. The middle shade in the second row is called Lash Line, and this is like a very almost black brown, and surprisingly, looking through all of my neutral palettes, I had a little bit of trouble finding a shade like this, because either I'll have a black or I'll have a dark brown, but it's not so dark that it could almost be mistaken for black. But I do have one shade within my Pat McGrath Mothership Sublime Bronze Ambition palette. It is this shade. So this is almost like a matte with glitter, like shimmer running through it. And in the pan, it looks pretty brown, but in the swatch, I remember the first time I used it, I was very surprised by how dark it was. This shade is called Illicit. The next shade in the second row is labeled Blend, and this is like a true neutral blending transition shade. The thing about labeling these shades like blend, crease, and transition is that, at least to me, those three terms are fairly interchangeable. But anyways, that's just something I noticed just talking about this palette. So for that truly neutral transition shade that is labeled Blend, I picked from my Sultry palette Birch. The leftmost shade in the second row is labeled Smoke, and this is like a deep brown, and I picked mine from the Natasha Denona Mini Glam palette, and I picked this shade called Seed, and I did pick this over, say, the dark brown in the Mini Nude palette, because the Mini Nude is actually very warm. There's a strong red tone within it, whereas the Mini Glam palette dark brown looks more neutral. Also, the depth of this brown within the Mini Glam palette was just right, whereas, for example, the one from the Sultry palette, Dystopian, is too dark. Moving on to the last row, starting from the right again, we have a shade labeled Brow Bone. And this is like another champagne, but it has more color to it, I would say. So for that, I picked from my Glam palette again, Mini Glam palette, this rightmost shade called Faye. It's a beautiful shade. It's a little bit more sheer. It's not like the most like opaque metallic, but the effect of it is very lovely. This last row is going to have a lot of shades from this little Mini Glam palette. The second from the right shade is labeled Outer Eyelid, and this is a like dark gray tone. And for that, I picked this middle shade from the Mini Glam called Anjo, A-N-J-O. These kind of shades are my favorite lid shade if I'm going for something a little bit deeper, as opposed to like something to bring light to my eyelid. If I want to make it a little bit smokier, I'll go for a shade like this. The middle shade in the last row is from the Mini Nude palette, and it is this middle shade called Lumino. This is another champagne shade, but is brighter than the other one from this row. When you compare Lumino from Mini Nude to Faye in Mini Glam, you can see that Lumino is a little bit lighter in depth compared to the Mini Glam. The second to last shade is labeled Outer Eyelid, and this is like a dark, almost warmish, it looks like it even has a little bit of red within this dark brown shimmer metallic. So the one I picked is not actually from the Dream Street palette, it's from the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette. But you know, I'm moving around my ColourPop eyeshadows all the time. So the one that is in the place of Elfish, this is actually the ColourPop I Think I Love You Howdy. And it's a dark brown shimmer with a little bit of red undertone. The last shade in this palette is labeled Center Eyelid, and it's like a bronze. I would say it's a very like true bronze, not copper leaning at all, and not really antique. Maybe it does look a little bit antique. So my pick from it is from my Mini Glam. It's this rightmost shade named Golden Flesh, and this is like a good bronze. It's one of my favorite bronzes. I don't like it when bronzes lean coppery with like more orange and warmth. I like it when a bronze looks, I guess I do like antique colors. That is another explanation for why I like this kind of tone as well, because it looks like what a brass vase would look like after 100 or 200 years. Those are all 15 shades. Now let me just talk through my eye look really quick. So to start it off, I took Birch all along my crease. Next, I took Twig on a smaller blending brush and focused that more on my outer corner of my eye. For my eyelid color, I wanted to play with my Sydney Grace Tiara again, so I swiped that on with my finger all across my inner eyelid and my mid eyelid. I also ran that along my lower lash lines. 2 shades left, y'all. So I took Faye, which is this one of the champagne colors, and ran that on my inner corner, as well as overlapped that on top of the Sydney Grace Tiara along my inner eyelids. So that cool tone shimmer would have some more tones layered on top of it. And last thing I did was use this dark brown within the Mini Glam palette called Seed, and use that to outline the outer corner of my eye. And I did like the babiest little shadow wing ever with this eyeshadow as well. Then I just popped on some mascara, and this is my final look. I showed you the arm swatches, the comparison of those swatches to Tread Moods with the actual product, went through the live swatches, and introduced every single shade individually, talked through my eye look using my version of the Natasha Denona Glam eyeshadow, and now we have arrived here. I love making these kinds of videos because it's a game, essentially, to me. It's a fun game and a fun exercise that also curbs my uncontrollable desire. Not uncontrollable because I control it with this game. And I think that this palette, if you find it beautiful, odds are you just find these colors beautiful in general when you're shopping looking for eyeshadow. So you may own something similar because you are just habitually drawn to something similar. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. It helps me out by letting me know that you liked it, and also helps me out in the YouTube world. Be sure to subscribe before you go if you haven't already subscribed, so that way you won't miss any of this. I also wanted to point out my earrings today. It's like a black skull, like 2 floating black skulls that I'm wearing on my own head. And I like dark things. Just in general, I know my disposition is super cheerful, super like, woo, but I do like dark things. And these are kind of my vibe. I'm pretty much vibing right now. One of my sweet subscribers has an Etsy shop where she makes handmade things like this and also sells some vintage stuff, so I will leave that in my description box. If any of y'all have Etsy shops or anything similar, message me on Instagram. I would love to feature y'all's products. That being said, remember that y'all are my treasure. Find the beauty in every day, but most importantly, be kind to yourself. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!